Blakut, Augat na nguyunga. Welcome back if you watched the first video. Hello if you're new here. So in the first video, we went over, the basic structure of Inuktitut, how to, put pieces together to make sentences, and we got into some basic endings. So in today's lesson, we're going to get into how to introduce yourself, but sort of, I think, as you'll see as videos get along, first we're going to figure out how to make meaning. So not just learning a word to memorize, but actually learning how we get there. I also wanted to share some resources for learning Inuktitut that I find really helpful, and hopefully you will too. So the first one, it's called Inuktitut Inuktitut, and this is what it looks like. It's by Stephen Frampton. I hope I'm saying his name right. But I got it from the Nunavut Bilingual Education Society's webpage, and it's really good if you're somebody who enjoys a workbook, but also it has so many different lessons in here, different activities for putting together Inuktitut words and how to get there. And it's a PDF that you could download. Because I'm down south, I have access to printing services, so I just had it printed out so that my my fiance could practice as well. So it's so good. It really breaks down different meanings. There's different practice exercises. I wish I had found this resource when I was teaching Inuktitut because it's so good. The other one is dusalanga.ca, and I'll include the link. And what I really like about this resource is you could choose, which dialect you want to learn. And if you're somebody who learns best through lessons, there's different, lessons you can follow. There's vocabulary, and you could, press play and hear what it sounds like for pronunciation. And, different grammar rules. So you could really go at your own speed. And there's also glossary. So if you want to learn some new terms, it's really good for that as well. And the last one, just off the top of my head, it's called Okalimagluk. And I know it's on the App Store. And it has access to a bunch of different Inuktitut books. There's a Inuktitut songbook written by one of my close friends, Ananatchak, so her grandmother. And songs are a really good way for, learning Inuktitut. There's different books. I think if you're just starting out, it might be hard to get into it if you're not sure what the meaning is. But if you want to practice listening, there's somebody reading along. So it's good for practicing, hearing what written Inuktitut sounds like. But yeah, so I would really recommend those resources. But yeah, so we'll get into the lesson for today. So how to introduce yourself, and some question endings, and some basic greetings. One more thing before we get into all of that, I just wanted to touch on pronunciation. And for Inuktitut, pronunciation is so important because one small sound can be the difference between one word and another. And the Inuktitut Inuktitut book is really good because it really gets into how to pronounce some of the trickier things, like the keikuka, with the Q, ningunga, and reruga, which French people are pretty good at. So just kind of touching on that briefly. When you're doing the K, it's kind of like a choking sound almost. So really getting into, the back of your throat. If you make a H sound like a H, you're almost there. You just got to get a little bit further. And it's ke, ku, ka. And it's important to get this sound down because we can take a word like kak. So kak means for something to pop. So you could say kakdok about a balloon, meaning it popped. or kind of like exploded like that. Or the word for hungry, which is gak with a K. So kak and gak are two different words, but that Q versus a K makes such a big difference. Another one is dupik. So dupik, which is a tent, and dupik. So dupik with a K means to like choke on something. So you want to make sure you have that k, especially like you're talking about a tent, you're not talking about somebody choking. So that Q versus K makes a big difference. And if you say anorak dok, so anorak dok, you'll see it written with one N. That means it's windy. Or if you say anorak dok with a double N, that means like he or she is dressing or getting dressed. So in Inuktitut, one letter can make a difference between one word or another. If there's interest, maybe I'll make a whole video on pronunciation. But practicing that ke, ku, ka, ni, ngu, nga, and re, ru, ra. So to get that R, one thing I learned in my French course is if you're gargling water, it's a really good way to get that R sound. So then you could go, re, ru, ra, like ano, ra, do. So getting those sounds in. But we'll get into pronunciation more, as we get into more vocabulary. But let's get into some question endings and greetings. So in this video, we're going to learn how to ask questions in Inuktitut. We'll learn the basic question endings for those like kind of main three people we'll start off with. So questions about me, towards you, or directed about a third person. So he, him, or sometimes it's an object. So like it. We'll also get into how to respond to questions, greetings, and how to introduce yourself and have a basic conversation in Inuktitut. So in lesson 1, we learned that different endings tell us who we're talking about, but there's special endings for questions. And in this video, we're just going into the basic 3. There's questions for when it's directed at multiple people, but we'll have a separate video later on getting into those different endings. So it's the same rule as before, where there's 2 versions of endings for each kind of question subject, and it just depends on what the root word ends with. So does it end in a vowel? Does it end in like a Q, a K, or a T? That's all gonna decide which ending we use. So the basic question endings for me, it would be vunga. So vunga if it ends in a I, U, or an A. Or if it ends in a Q, K, or T, it would be punga. So one thing I would tell my students is like, you're learning so many endings, it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. Just focus on the ones that you're going to use the most. So that would probably be questions towards you or a third person. Rarely are you asking something about yourself because you already know it. It's good to know, but I would say prioritize, the ones you're going to use the most, if that'll keep you from getting overwhelmed. So when I'm asking you a question and we have a root word like iga, which means to cook, I would use the ending vit. So because it ends in a, iga ends in an A, we're using vit. So iga vit, are you cooking? Another example could be nere, so to eat, nere vit, are you eating? And if it ended in a Q, a K, or a T, like bisuk, we would use the ending beat. So bisuk beat. Are you walking? Another example is okallak, so to speak. Okallak beat. Are you speaking? Imek, so to drink. Imek beat. Are you drinking? So keeping an eye on those endings. You could also do that trick where, if you're not too sure, say it out loud. If it flows well, that's probably the right ending. And then the last ending we'll look at is for he, she, or an object. So it could be about the weather. That's when we would use that it ending. So we would use va if it ends in a vowel. For example, igava, is he or she cooking? Igava. Or if we're looking at a word that ends in a Q, K, or a T, we'd use pa. So bisukpa, is he or she walking? Bisukpa. So just keeping an eye on that last letter, and that'll tell you what to use. So if we're talking about the weather, so weather in Inuktitut is sila. I could say sila kanuipa, and that means how's the weather. So we use a pa. It's not he or she, but we're talking about an object or something that's like inanimate. So we're going to use that third person ending as well there. For example, the word for blizzard is biqsik. So biqsik. I could say biqsikpa. Biqsikpa. Is there a blizzard? So these are kind of the three basic endings, and if you're getting overwhelmed, you could just focus on the vit and beat, or va and pa. And once you have those memorized, you have them locked down, then you can go towards, maybe the vunga or punga, just to know. Because maybe, I don't know, you're not sure if you're sleeping. You could say, sinik punga? Am I sleeping? But yeah, so just those basic endings, and you use the, root word, take a look at what it ends with, and then you could just match it up with the right question ending. So some good new root words to learn, to practice. The first one is namak, and that's to be all right. So notice there's a double A and a double M. So when you see those double letters, you just hold on to the sound a little bit longer. So namak, if I wanted to ask you, are you okay? I could say namak beat. Namak beat. And I'm using beat instead of vit because namak ends in a K. The next one is kya. So kya, and that's to cry. Maybe we're talking about a baby. Take a minute to put in your guess. Are we going to say kyava or kyapa? Which one of those flows better? So because it ends in a for kya, we're going to say kyava. And that means, is he or she crying? The next one is gak. So that means to be hungry. Gak. And kak ends in a K. So we're going to say gakpa. The next one is akatok. So akatok means to be full. If I'm asking, are you full? I would say akatok beat. So akatok beat is, are you full? And if I wanted to ask you about a third person, I would say akatok ba. So akatok ba is he or she full? And the last word here is imerok. So imerok is to be thirsty. So you notice we have that kind of that part from imek, which is to drink. And here we have imerok, which is to be thirsty. So if I'm asking you, are you thirsty? I would say imerok bit. Imerok bit. And if I'm asking about a third person, imerok ba. Imerok ba. Is he or she thirsty? So here's the examples from before with namak. So namak bit, are you okay? And namak ba, is he or she okay? So here we have kha, using that vit ending because kha ends in a vowel. So kha vit, are you crying? Or kha va, is he or she crying? So just by changing that ending, we have a completely new sentence. So getting into answering questions. There's a pretty easy formula for answering questions. First, it's good to know how do you say yes and no. So for yes, you just say I. So I, or maybe you just raise your eyebrows. Both means yes. And for no, you could say akka. So akka. You could scrunch your nose. Or you could say nauk. It's really up to you. So we're going to start here with a little example question. So namak ba. Is he, she, or maybe an object okay? So you notice we have that question ending. So when we answer a question, you're going to put in that yes or no. So here the answer is I, which is yes. And we're just going to reaffirm it with the subject ending. So not the question version, but the one where it's just he, she, or it. So making sure you're matching. So if it's ba, we're talking about he, she, or it. So when you're answering, you want to make sure you're still talking about that same person or same thing. So I namakto. So the question is he or she okay? Here we say yes. He or she is okay. So just changing the ending from a question into an affirmative. I namakto. Yes. For example, we're talking about your sister, for example, I namakto. Or if the answer is no, here is where we get into those, middle pieces. We're gonna say akka nama nit do. So nit is kind of like saying not. So if you speak French, we have ne pas. In English, we say not. In Inuktitut, we add nit into the middle, and that means not. So one quick rule for nit is it has to come after a vowel. So notice how namak ends in a K. Nit is going to erase that. So instead of namak nitok, which is really hard to say, it doesn't really flow well, we just get rid of the K and it's akka nama nit tok. So we're just fitting it in between that root word namak and the ending tok, and we're just throwing that in there. Namangitok. No, he or she is not okay. So here's another example. So here we have nereyok. So remember, nere is to eat, and because nere ends in a vowel, we're adding yok. So nereyok, he is eating. If he is not eating, we're going to do the same thing and add nit in between the ending and the root word. So now it's nerengitok. Nerengitok. He is not eating, or he didn't eat. So because nere ends in a vowel, you could just add nit right in there. And the reason why we're getting into this now is because when you're introducing yourself, or when you're maybe asking somebody how they're doing, nit is going to be in there. So it's important to know, what does it mean when you hear ngit. So here's just another example with a root word, bisuk, that ends in a K, which means to walk. So we're just going to drop the K if we're adding ngit, because ngit has to come after a vowel. So instead of bisuk ngittuuq, which if you try to say that, it's like kind of stops in your mouth. It doesn't come out smoothly. But if you drop the K and you say bisungittuuq, notice how it flows a lot easier. It's a lot easier to pronounce. So bisungittuuq is he is not walking. It could also be she is not walking. It's really just based on context, so you know who you're talking about. So I'm just going to start off by reading this practice conversation, practice listening and hearing the different parts, and then we're going to break it down so you know how we get there and how you would respond. So this is an example conversation. I just changed the names from one of the Tusalinga lessons, and this is really how a basic conversation would go. So ublakut or ullakut, depending on where you're from. JC, ullakut. Aukatnak, kinauvit. So notice that ending, vit, kinauvit. JC, uvanga. So uvanga means me. So he's saying me. And here, igvit. So igvit is you. So I'm saying yes, you. So uvanga, me, igvit, you. Jesiu yunga. That yunga, I am. Nameng miu tau vit. JC, arvang miu tau yunga. Augatnak, kanuit pit. JC, kanui ngit dunga. So it's okay if you don't understand this, we're gonna break it down even more. So ullakut means good morning. So ublak or ullak means morning. So ullakut, or I say ublakut because my mom's from Akvet, that's the dialect I learned. It means good morning. You could also say unnusakut, which is good afternoon. So unnusakut. Notice that there's a double N, so we hold on to that a little bit. So unnusa is afternoon, so we say unnusakut when we are saying good afternoon. And unnukut means good evening. So unnuak is night. So you could see how kind of like the time of day is in the greeting. So ublakut, unnusakut, or unnukut are all greetings you can use. So when you're introducing yourself, or maybe one thing if you're meeting Inuit sometimes, they'll say kinauvit. So kinauvit means who are you? So kina is who. So kinauvit, with that question ending for you, means who are you? And here JC says uvanga, and remember uvanga is me, and here we say I, yes, igvit. So igvit is the word for you. And here he responds jesiu yunga. So we'll get into why there's a U, and if you notice in the beginning of the video I say augat na nguyunga. So there's two different possibilities for when you're introducing yourself. It depends on the final sound of your name, so we'll get into that. So again, kina is who. So sometimes maybe they'll say nereyok, which is he or she is eating. You want to know who? You could just say kina. So kinauvit, who are you? So getting into how to respond. So if your name ends in a vowel sound, so if we just say JC, C isn't a vowel, but it ends in an E sound. So that's why we add the U yunga. So JC yunga. It has that nice flow, JC yunga. Another example is if we had the English name Anna. Anna ends in a, which is a vowel sound. So we're adding that U yunga. And in Inuktitut, if there's a AU, like for example my name, it makes the ow sound. So we would say Anau yunga. My brother, his name's Kaumak. It's a little bit different with a K. So, and with a Q, so you would drop it. He could say Kaumau yunga, or yeah, he'd probably say Kaumau yunga. It just flows better. But if it ends in a consonant, for example, we'll take the English name David. So David ends in a consonant sound, so we would say David nguyunga. Because my name is Augat Nak, we're dropping the Q, but it's a double vowel. So that's the exception to the uyunga, because it's like you can't go 3 vowels in a row. It would be like Augat Na uyunga. It doesn't really sound too good. So instead you would say Augat Na nguyunga. Another example, so Patricia ends in a vowel sound. We could say Patriciao yunga. Another example with a consonant sound. I'm trying to think of a consonant name. It's hard on the spot. We could say Chris. So we wouldn't say Chrisu yunga. We would say Chris ngu yunga. Chris ngu yunga. So because it ends in like a consonant sound. So the exception is if it's a double vowel or it ends in like a D, S, W, T, and one of those like consonant sounding endings, you're gonna add nguyunga. If it ends in a single vowel sound like Anna, JC, Kauma, you're going to just add the U yunga. So Kaumau yunga, Anau yunga, Chris nguyunga. So the next question is, where are you from? And we say Nameng Miu Dao Vit. So one thing I think that scares people off of Inuktitut sometimes is if you took away the dashes, it just seems like so many letters. It can be overwhelming. One thing I like to do is break it down into the bits. So the ending is the vit. So that's a question towards you. Nami means where. The R is kind of just for flow. We'll get into how to get there later. But mutak, which is the middle part, but we changed the Q to a U for flow. Don't worry about that. Mutak is like to be from a place. So really it's like if we're going directly English translation, breaking it down, it would be where, kind of exactly where are you from? Nameng miu dao vit. And to answer this, you're going to fill in that part and change the ending from a question. So vit is a question towards you. So when you answer, you're going to use the me ending. So in English, it would be, where are you from? And you would respond, I am from this place. So that's why we use the yunga ending. So here, Akvean is filled in. Akvean miu tau yunga. So the Inuktitut rules might seem a little bit complicated. Don't worry, we'll get there. We'll get into it. But really, a lot of the rules make sense because they'll follow a pattern. So Q, if there's something that's coming with an M, in the middle afterwards, so we'll get into those middle pieces later. Usually, if it ends in a Q, it's going to turn into an R. And the reason for that is, for example, I'm going to say the Inuktitut name for my home community, Inuktitut, which is Rankin Inlet. It ends in a Q. If I was trying to plug it in just like that and say Inuktitut Miutau, it kind of stops. It's hard to go from a Q to a M. But if we change that Q to an R and say Inuktitut Miutau, it flows a lot easier. It's easier to just say that phrase without much stopping in your throat. So Q's usually turn into an R if it's at the end. And if it's a K, usually it'll end up changing into an NG. So instead of trying to think of a K sounding community. I'm thinking of the Q ones. Anyways, it would turn into an NG. If it's a vowel like Ottawa, it's a lot easier. You would just say Ottawa Miutau. But Q, change it to an R. K, change it to an NG. So the main question, this is something you'll probably get asked a lot, is Kanuit beat. So Kano is how. Kanuit beat is how are you. And so the ngit in Kanuitunga, which is the response, might seem a little bit complicated. Like, why is there a not when I'm saying I'm fine? So just because there's a not, it doesn't mean it's like a negative answer. Because Kanuitunga in a direct translation means like there's nothing wrong, which is good, means things are fine. So that's why we say Kanuitunga, which means I'm okay. If you said Kanuitunga, it's like, there's something that's the matter. So going back to this conversation, now that we broke it down. So Ublakut, good morning. Ublakut, good morning. Kinauvit, who are you? Uvanga, me. I igvit, yes, you. Nameng miutauvit. Achvang miutauyunga. Kanuit bit. Kanuingitunga. So this is a basic conversation. It's good to, practice saying it out loud. And in a couple slides, I'll kind of have a blank version for you to practice saying it yourself. So one big, block for a lot of people learning a new language is being shy to say it. So, you can know it in your head, but if you want to use it, you have to actually practice saying it out loud. And if you're shy, just try at home first. Listen to books, practice. And then you'll get more confident as you go. Yeah, so sometimes people say Kanuingitungatao, which means I'm also doing fine. So when you're reading Inuktitut, often it'll look like the top, where it's like so many words, it's very overwhelming. How do you get there? But if you break it down, like it is at the bottom, into the different pieces, it's easier to make sense of, what the words are. So what's being said. So you could say, okay, I know tunga means I am, okay? Ngit means not. But if we say kanuingit, that's like nothing's the matter. And if you're not sure what Tao is, maybe you go on to Salanga, look at the glossary or the grammar, and Tao means also. So kanuingit tunga Tao. If you know kanuingit tunga means I'm okay. If you add the Tao, you know it means also. So we put it together. I'm also okay. Kanuingit tunga Tao. So when you're reading Inuktitut words, and this is more so as you advance, don't be scared off by big words. Break it up into the different pieces, break it into the ending, the root word, and then you could find those middle bits. So here you can practice your own conversation, put in your name, put in where you come from, practice pronouncing things.